consider, say, such theocratic states as Vatican or Israel as illegal for the simple reason that they support religion?
Yeah, I mean, the question of what makes a state liberal is, of course, a very complex question. There are many different dimensions of that. Of course, my own interest in this kind of talk is what makes a state liberal vis-a-vis religion. And I believe that here, the constitutive element of a liberal stance towards religion is indeed one that recognizes the freedom of religion, religious expression, and seeks to treat different religions equally. So now this is, however, of course, a matter of degree. And, for example, as I mentioned, there are some states which continue to have established churches. So the UK, the United Kingdom, has an established church, the Church of England. And that, because it has an established church, obviously it's not treating all religions as equal, but it's a very weak establishment. And it's an establishment that has become weaker over time. And in other respects, then the Church of the United Kingdom has moved in the direction of trying to treat different religions, including especially Islam, given the importance of Islam in the UK, has moved towards a more liberal stance. So is a state liberal or not? Is Israel, it's always a matter of degree. It's not a matter of kind of yes or no. And of course, then outside the domain of religion, what makes a state liberal? We speak of the other individual freedoms, the free press, and so on. We might, if we want to, again here, there's always a matter of degree, including in Russia today. So I don't think it's a case to say a state either is liberal or isn't liberal, the cases you mentioned, but I don't actually remember which cases they were, but I would always say it's a multi-dimensional phenomenon and a matter of degree rather than simply a yes or a no.
Представляет самого себя. В продолжение вопроса коллеги тоже из РИСИ. Такой вопрос. Вот вы сказали о том, что язык не имеет идеологических каких-то установок. Вот, борьба за равенство языка национальными движениями, а также наличие, вот борьба национальных движений за языковое равенство, не опровергает ли вот ваш тезис о том, что язык не имеет идеологических установок? Ну и второй момент, вот, в частности, Республики Татарстан, борьба за в свое время, борьба за установление латинского алфавита в татарском языке, это не относится ли к этой сфере?
Language pluralism and language equity, and for example, in Russia, it was a proposal to introduce Latin alphabet as other language, but it was denied.
Okay, I'm not sure exactly what the question is. I mean, yes, the politics of orthography and script reform are a key aspect of language politics. And of course, in the case of the Tatar language, with the series of changes and proposed changes over the last century or so, any such change, any change of alphabet will disadvantage those who are heavily invested in one script already, and make or the initial, the change earlier to using the Cyrillic script. This is made inaccessible, the earlier writings in Arabic script and so on. So I'm not, maybe you could ask the question again, because I'm not sure what the question is specifically.
Которые были опубликованы ранее, но я не очень понял, в чем суть вопроса.
Whether language is a ideological construction too, because such issues as nationalist sentiments about the language.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Yes. I mean, the answer, absolutely. Language is not. I should have emphasized this even more strongly. I tried to emphasize it. Language is not simply a neutral mode
Да,
of
я абсолютно с вами
communication.
согласен.
No, of course not.
Естественно, язык не
Language
просто
is central to nationalist projects in this part of the world, throughout Central Europe, East Central Europe, the Soviet space, the post-Soviet space. Language is central to most nationalist projects. And some of those projects also involve religion, but this is, after all, the part of the world where nationalist conflicts turn above all on language. And of course, I am, having worked in my last substantial empirical project on Transylvania, same thing is true. The nationalist conflicts turned especially on matters of language. So I do not mean to argue that language is somehow completely neutral and just a means of communication. What I do want to argue, though, is that nationalist language politics, that is, the contrast I was drawing between religion and language is that religion in itself, inside the religious tradition, the very texts of scriptural religions themselves are structures of authority. They are programs for ways of life. We cannot say the same thing about language. That is, we can distinguish between language and the uses made of language in nationalist movements. And so, of course, language can become a key focus of struggle and an object of great passion, central ideological battlefield. But the battle is not about, as it were, the battle is not about the substance of the language. The battle is about the domains in which the language is used. The battle is about whether the language should be written in one script or another, or whether schools should teach in one language or another. It's not about the content of the language. Of course, the content of the language may also be subject to certain representations, and in many contexts of nationalist language struggles, people will say, oh, this isn't a real language, you can't possibly use, let's say, you can't possibly use, Slovak as a peasant language in the domain of science. You can't possibly use Tatar for this. You need to use Russian. Yes, there are representations of the language itself, but that's not the key struggle. The key struggle is about the domains of language use. Whereas in the domain of religion, there are struggles about the actual content of religion. And that's what I meant by saying that cultural and symbolic processes can be used to more deeply devalue and stigmatize particular religions and forms of religious practice than they can forms of language practice.
Excuse me, would you say the same about the so-called sacred languages? The languages used in cults.
Well, yes, that's an interesting question in itself. That is the question of sacred languages and so on. And obviously, it's okay. So, but even there,
it's both religion and language.
Of course, it's both religion and language, and so you could say yes. For Islam, you cannot divorce Islam from the language of the Revelation. You cannot, in principle, you cannot translate it. And yet, in practice, one can distinguish language and religion, even in Islam, right? And you see that there is a public sphere of religious discussion in the Muslim world that increasingly actually takes place in English and in French and in German and Europe, where people are arguing on the web and seeking fatwas and making advice about what it is to live as a good Muslim in France or Germany and so on. All this is happening in English because very few people master the Arabic. So yes, even in the case where there are sacred languages, where you cannot, in principle, be a truly good Muslim without knowing Arabic and reading the Quran in Arabic and so on, still there we can distinguish the religion from the linguistic.
Человек не может быть по-настоящему мусульманином без того или иного уровня владения арабским.